at this live time. So welcome everyone who's listening in on Facebook. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We're really excited for the talk we have. This is the Michiana Science Cafe. This is our March meeting. We have meetings every month. We're happy to bring the scientists together with all of us in the public to have great conversations about important topics. So tonight, I'm very excited to introduce our speaker. He has a very impressive resume. He'll be talking about the proverbial boiled frogs, how we are these proverbial boiled frogs, but with forethought, steam, and leadership, we can hop out before we are cooked. So it's feeling hot, but I'm excited to hear some solutions. So Gary, if you want to move to the next slide, I'll go ahead and give you a very impressive resume. So Gary Gilot is a professional engineer. He is retired, but still an active civic engaged volunteer. He was most recently the assistant director for the community engagement at the Center for Civic Innovation, affiliated with the College of Engineering at the University of Notre Dame. He was also the College of Engineering liaison to Stayer Executive Education for Engineering Leadership Training. Gary mentors for programs curated at the CCI, including Bowman Creek Educational Ecosystem, Westside Educational Ecosystem, and the Elkhart Catalyst Program. Gary was also an adjunct professor of the practice teaching community-based project leadership in the College of Engineering. Gary was a fellow at the University Center for Social Concerns. Gary is also a board member and project mentor at In Focus, Inc., an entrepreneurial-focused not-for-profit that attracts, develops, and retains STEAM talent as innovation consultants who help make this a more vibrant region for everyone. Gary was also the Public Works Director for the City of South Bend for over 12 years and continues to serve on the Board of Public Works in South Bend. Gary previously served in similar roles in Elkhart for over 16 years. Gary gained 6 years of early career experience as an engineering consultant and received the Ivan H. Brinegar Municipal Management Award through the Indiana Association of Cities and Towns. In August of 2010, Gary was National Public Works Leader of the Year, recognized by the American City and County Magazine for Technology Innovation. On a more personal note, Gary and his wife Deborah have been married for over 40 years. He has a BS in Civil and Environmental Engineering from Clarkson University and an MBA from IUSB, and is a professional engineer in the state of Indiana. So as you can tell, we're very excited to have Gary here, bringing so much diverse experience in science and engineering and engaging with the community in meaningful ways. And we're really excited to hear from him. So brief note before I pass it over to Gary, he's going to present here for us for approximately 20 to 30 minutes. And we will have a Q&A session at the end of this talk, which we're hoping to get in some great meaty discussion. So please, whenever you have comments, feel free to drop them into the comment section, or if you have questions, drop them in the comment section of this Facebook Live feed. And I will moderate and present those questions to Gary at the conclusion of his prepared presentation. So without further ado, I pass it over to Gary. Thank you for being here tonight with us.
Thank you, Morgan, and appreciate you introducing the topic and my background. I claim all those affiliations, but I'm going to disclaim that the opinions I express tonight are related to any of those organizations. The opinions I express are mine alone, not representing any of those folks where I volunteer. So, oftentimes they're hard, complex, long-term, really important, but not viewed as urgent problems that lead to what we all call the boiled frog syndrome. And it's that slowly turning up the heat thing that gets the frog relaxed, and he doesn't know enough, or she doesn't know enough to hop out of the pot. And I feel like our existing housing stock, our high occupancy buildings are facing that type of challenge. So there's some existential risk to us frogs. One of them that concerns me is the legacy lead paint issue with our housing stock. Any of the houses that are older than 1978 had lead paint. They outlawed lead paint after that, but we have dust accumulating from windows going up and down and things like that, and particularly a health challenge for children under 7 as it impacts brain development. We have the COVID-19 indoor air quality issues, and I really don't believe that COVID-19 will be the last airborne pandemic that we'll face. But um, we hope to learn from our experience with this one. Um, Extreme heat days are coming over the next 30 days with climate change, and I'll have some particulars that the scientists forecast for our area. All the while, we're attempting in the city of South Bend to be carbon neutral by 2050. So these all suggest to the scientists and engineers in the room that we have to do something different with the air column, with issues of filtration, disinfection. So those would be kind of capital and operating and maintenance things, but even common sense things like how we do surface cleaning for dust or for deposits, and can we integrate what we do with heating, ventilating, and air conditioning? I use that HVAC acronym, engineering hazard to use too many acronyms, sorry. Um, but we need to come up with ideas that address these while reducing the energy use and shifting us toward renewables as how we power these systems. And obviously, setting up an experiment to do each of these in a silo is cleaner science. I get that, but it's kind of economically unaffordable, and we run out of time, or amongst these various concurrent crises that we're facing, we pick winners and losers, and we actually need to address them all. So let's dive a little deeper with legacy lead paint. Mostly the issue is respirable lead paint dust in old houses. So if you're under 7, your brain hasn't developed to the point where there's a protection against blood lead poisoning. And you know how toddlers put everything in their mouths. So it's not only inhalation, but or respirable dust, but it's ingestion of everything that falls on the floor or chewing on the windowsill. Um, Great for teething. Um, we got a federal grant to do remediation of some houses in South Bend. It's about $3 million. And honestly, if we got one like that every 3 years with the number of pre-1978 houses, it would take us about 300 years going the way we are going with the federal rules associated with those grants. So we were looking for ideas with the Society of Women Engineers Student Club at Notre Dame and with the Bowman Creek Educational Ecosystem, which has students and advisors from the community from a lot of different institutions. And we worked with some help from the Notre Dame Lead Innovation Team, its affiliated professors, to make sure we didn't go off track. We looked at things like HEPA filters instead of conventional furnace filters, and we looked at things like microfiber cloths that were just the right size to pick up the lead particles, or what are other common sense things? You get a lot of windows in a house, and it's very expensive to remediate each window to be movable, and it's the moving of the window that generates the lead dust. So you can pick one window per room that's going to be the movable window, and everything else is going to be painted stationary, encapsulating the lead problem. So COVID-19, if we recognize that we are far more vulnerable to the coronavirus indoors than outdoors. Some of that is population within the volume of air, but an awful lot of it is that houses are designed to have 10% fresh makeup air and 90% recycled air through the furnace fan or some other air moving system. Um, we tend to buy cheap, ineffective filters for the particle size involved with this issue once again, but we could get HEPA furnace filters that would capture down in the micron size that we need to be, and we could install ultraviolet, or there's some promising new LED disinfection technologies coming on the market right adjacent to the furnace fan and the ductwork. One of the other things that common sense might suggest is let's bring more fresh air into the house or into the building. The downside for our sustainability fans is that it takes a lot more energy to condition the air, to heat it in the winter or to cool it in the summer, which makes you wonder if there's an aha moment that heat exchangers for heat transfer from the exhaust air to the fresh air, should that be more of the standard system as we face extreme heat days in the future? I'll get into that more. So we know about change as a global issue, but some researchers at Notre Dame and Purdue have quantified and applied the model locally to South Bend. They modeled the best case, the worst case, and some curves in between. And the thing that catches my eye is that we go from a history of having these extreme heat days or days over 95 degrees Fahrenheit of 3 per year, per typical year. And the forecast by 2050 would be 38, and by 2080, 61 extreme heat days per year, or a climate that's more like Texas. So the good news is that we might save a little bit on our heating bill in the winter as we have milder winters. But the bad news while you're trying to be carbon neutral by 2050 is you're going to have 4 by more cooling energy required for these oppressive heat days. I'm particularly worried about the poor who can't afford the air conditioning, that people may actually perish for extended periods of time with this extreme heat. Um, should we change the way we do our houses in South Bend? We can see this coming. Should there be white roofs that reflect the heat? Um, should we change the insulation requirements? Should there be low E glass? So on. Um, uh, should we, while we have 30 years to plan for it, should we be planting the right tree in the right place to provide shade for that house to limit the urban heat island effect? And you can't do that in 2050 or 2080. You can do that today. Here's just some excerpts from that report on our local region. And on the left there, you see the change in the extreme heat days. In the upper right, you see the energy, the cooling degree days that we're going to face increasing quite a bit. The analog of what our climate will be more like, showing us in southern Texas in the summer analog, and winter much more moderate. Along with this extreme heat problem, the civil engineer in me also worries about the extreme precipitation events. We're already seeing within a 2-year period a 1,500-year return interval storm or a 1,000-year return interval storm. And it's supposed to happen once per millennium, and we get them within a couple of years. Obviously, something changing about the intensity, frequency, and duration of rainfall in South Bend. So could we integrate these existential risks with some studies? Could we design some scientific studies with a myriad of smart ideas that we could socialize with we the people, and then collaborate with the city and some contractors who've got some pragmatic skills on setting up tests. Uh, South Bend might be a great beta city. We're large enough to have every complex large city issue, and yet we're small enough to be pretty smart and nimble. We've got a research institution in our backyard. I think we'd be a good place to model and collect data to support the approach to a smarter integrated solution. Um, we can't afford to solve these in silos. So we need strong science, engineering solutions, financial models, and we need to work together now. Um, let's take a look. Recent history, housing stock, at a chapter that was sad but necessary. We absolutely had a crisis on our hand with a bunch of blighting houses with mold and missing all the copper and holes in the roof and on and on. A lot of complaints to 911 for nuisances that they posed to the neighborhood. So I find no fault whatsoever with Mayor Pete tackling this issue with a big program to deal with particularly the fallout of the 2008 financial crisis with the mortgage derivatives and a lot of people who were overextended. So a real meltdown in the housing industry and housing finance. We invested $20 million I observed those contracts coming through the Board of Works. So there was the actual demolition contracts, there was transactional costs, legal costs, remediation costs, um, and we mostly demolished. There was a percentage that got rehab, but the vast majority got demolished. So we dealt with the problem at the end of the useful service life. We not only spent the $20 million, but we lost the future stream of property tax revenues at 1% of each house. So I'm saying there's $200 a year per house over a decade. That's another $2 million of lost property tax. Guess what? The taxpayers in common also have to mow and maintain and clean up messes on those. So there's another 2 million we spend on holding costs. So the lesson we should have learned is that public and private costs really pile up when you wait till the end of the useful service life. Not a good time to do your investing. It had to be done, but going forward, we could use that wisdom. What if we invested 20,000 per house in the poorest of housing uh, to extend the useful service life, to preserve the value, to enhance the neighborhood, to make it a healthier, safer home for quality of life for people in the city, a more sustainable house for the poorest of the poor? What if instead of always being last, what if they were involved in helping us show the way? Um, it stabilizes things for everybody, and there's a net positive to property tax revenue, and we don't have the effect of depressing property values all around the blighting house that isn't getting the needed reinvestment. So a strategic investment at the right time might be a good lesson learned, and I think it would be even better if it incorporated suggestion from all of the intelligent people in the Science Cafe of how do we, to borrow from President Biden, build back better. Um, so a smart scope with strategic timing offers the concept of synergies, where 1 + 1 + 1 housing dollars would be something more than $3 in benefits and future cost avoidance. That makes dollars and cents, and I apologize for the pun. Um, I think there's a three-legged stool that I want to talk to you thematically about. How do we get out of the boiling, the slowly boiling pot? I think there's three factors. It's forethought, it's theme, and it's leadership. So why forethought? While you have the time, you got to take the time to analyze the situation, plan a new course. You're often in uncharted territory. And so you don't know all the answers. And that's what scientific exploration is about all the time. You're always in uncharted territory. So this is okay. You're in your comfort zone. You know this. Why STEAM? I think these concurrent challenges of indoor air quality and social determinants of health are really complex and they can't be solved in silos. And they do require all of the STEAM skills, cross-cutting, teamwork, good communication, integrating the interdisciplinary approaches, and please include the social sciences. Um, why leadership? Sometimes we think of traits and leadership, and he or she's a good person. They're a kind person. They're uh, a thoughtful leader. I'm actually talking about leadership behaviors, the art of positive interpersonal influence with or without authority. And without authority is actually the more powerful exercise because it's not a matter of rank, it's about persuasiveness. And how do we persuade people? I think we do it three ways. The first way, the effective leader scientist uses a well-designed experiment and sound data to positively influence people on what they think. They listen to how you constructed your hypothesis, your experiment, your data, and they say, makes sense to me, right? That's how you get the yes. That's how you get away from inertia. The second part, the leader communicates their caring why of what we do. They show empathy, the solidarity. It has to be well expressed. Um, and you're trying to influence what people feel. In mentoring young engineers and scientists, I always tell them performance is as much about relationships as task. And I like you to go to the relationship vector first because with smart people, it's important to remember they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Okay. The effective leader makes a compelling call on that thinking and feeling stuff, but also defines models of what solutions might look like for people and get people to say, I'm in. What do I do? Right? So you're looking to use the forethought, STEAM, and leadership. So my challenge is that I think far too little is getting done. Not enough pragmatic science, not enough applied science. We need your competence. We need your positive influence. Read that leadership. Our neighborhoods, our community, even the world needs the STEAM talent in a leadership role, taking action now. Not a year from now, not a decade from now, and certainly not 20 years from now. So it's a clarion call to action now. Um, what does it take to overcome inertia? I think when you look for what's missing, why won't people jump in? Sure, there's a few trailblazers, a few early adopters, but there is not a one-stop shop. What do you do if you want to take care of your family's health and safety and prepare your home to be sustainable and resilient for the future? Have you found that in the yellow pages? I mean, you start Googling and you realize you're the integrator. There is no one-stop shop. Or you call a contractor, a remodeling contractor, you call an HVAC contractor. How do you feel about getting your rationale for what's in your enlightened best interest to do from the sales guy for the systems installer? I don't feel so good about that. I would rather have objective scientists coaching me through it. So the second concern I have is there's lack of a system integrator. I want somebody who can walk me through this. I could figure it out. I'm a smart guy. You're all smart people. You'd figure it out eventually. You'd make a lot of mistakes. There'd be a learning curve. There'd be ineffectiveness, inefficiency, queuing in the system while you figure it all out. Every one of us doing trial and error. Wouldn't it make more sense to encourage some people with the skills package to act as integrators? Entrepreneurial opportunity, if I ever saw one. Who go through it dozens of times, become very good at it, have relationships, have a network, and can orchestrate exactly what you need for your home. So lack of knowledge, lack of objective data, lack of a layperson's translator to explain all this complicated science associated with modifying building envelopes and HVAC and air columns and touch surfaces. There's just so much to interrupting the pathways of human exposure to issues in our environment. So seeing problems as opportunities. You all lead purpose-driven lives. You know something about economics and training worker capacity. You make an awful lot of decisions. You don't check your brain in the locker when you go home. You make complicated decisions for your families. And there are opportunities in this to use all of those skill packages that you've developed over the years to help be part of the solution. But it starts with data and scientific experiments on what works and what's cost effective. Let's talk about that during our Q&A. So the challenge, collect some baseline data, monitor, do some pilots tests. We need the data normalized for size of house, age of house, type of house. There's 40,000 dwelling units. Some of you are great statisticians. How many do you need for a valid sample? I think somewhere over 400. You're not going to go do 400 houses though. So what could you do in the lab to replicate and prove the reproducibility of your results? And what could you do if there was a collaboration with the city on 4 representative houses that you could run a myriad of tests with controlled conditions and with advice and counsel of the health officer? A lot of the experiments I did with students, I had to run them by Dr. Mark Fox and get his okay. And there was no way he was going to let us run any of our experiments in households that had little children under 7. It just isn't going to happen. So while we're being experimenters and doing our applied science, we're going to do no harm. Okay. And much as there's a pressing case to do this for houses, I'm even more worried about high occupancy multi-tenant office buildings post-pandemic. Are any of you hearing from employees that they don't want to return to the stationary cruise ship? Right? I hear that a lot. Why you and why now? Awareness from people with great Competence and caring builds trust. Another one of my favorite pet expressions is change moves at the speed of trust, relationship before the task. And we need to change or be the proverbial boiled frog. So scope definition and translate it to layperson stuff and develop a springboard. You got to get to more than the trailblazer early guys who always have the first new gadget on the block, right? You got to get to the middle of the bell curve. And that isn't going to happen by anything I see going on in the community today. We need to change in order to provide a springboard. And I think scientists can lead. So why the catalyst? Part of it is just capacity. I'm always aware of general contracting capacity in the community because I build a lot of the water, sewer, roads, the building blocks of civilization to keep a city working. And I'm very cognizant as I do historic investments in combined sewer overflow, long-term control plans, and things like that, that there's only so much capacity to build or rebuild things. And so we have to plan things out over 20-year planning horizons and execute on a plan in 5-year capital tranches. And so same thing with the housing stock. If you wait too long, there's not enough capacity in the home builders or home remodelers or HVAC contractors or any of the folks we need to solve this crisis that's like a slow motion crash. And think about the generational equity issue of this. If we don't act timely now with all of our skills, we're dooming our future selves, our children, our grandchildren. You don't want that on your conscience. You want to get it in gear. So forethought and action to get society moving is desperately needed. Scientific leadership is needed, cost-effective solutions, and a social option for the poor is especially needed. And that's actually where I'd like to convince the city that they should be investing in showing what works and ideas that can be transferred into the mainstream market. If not you, who, and if not now, when? What is the point of science and engineering if not to discover how things work and to use our scientific insights to be a force for good? That's our why of being and what we do. So we need to engage with solving the most vexing challenges facing humanity and the planet at this time. Don't be on the sideline. Don't be a spectator. Jump in. Be in the arena. I will take any questions, comments.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That was very empowering. I think just the ideas that you're presenting are talking about issues in a way that I don't know. It feels like I wanted to jump off of my chair and go start doing something now. So I totally agree with that. And you're saying, if not you, how, who, and if not now, when. So I will jump into our questions here in the comments section. We have a couple here, so I'll just start with the first one. In your opinion, what is the biggest obstacle to achieving an integrated system solution for many of these problems? I know you mentioned a couple, but is it financial, creativity, or will? What is the biggest problem to make this integrated solution, and how do we get about addressing that?
Yeah, it's what I see in all of my engaged work with pilot programs where we're attempting to do projects. The key is you want to do things with the community, not for them or to them. Please, no savior complex that step aside. I'm the scientist. I'm the engineer. I'll fix this for you. You have to really listen. Now, they're not going to tell you how to do the details of your science, but they live there. It's their home. It's their neighborhood. It's their community. And so you do have to listen to the pain points, get a sense of priority, get a sense of what they're most worried about. And it may be that in order to get elected and appointed officials to resource your ideas, that you need to align with what we, the people, feel is their greatest pain point. So it truly is a collaborative process. It improves our science, our engineering to listen to the people we serve and to incorporate their good ideas into what we do. I actually think it makes the applied research better. And clearly the community gains from having a lot of smart people roll up their sleeves and work on some of the most vexing problems. So it's a symbiotic mutual benefit when done right, and it's not easy.
Mm.
We kind of get in there and we got our idea, we've got our theme of our research, and I got this, and it's like a salesman mentality. Here's what I got. How much do you want to buy? Instead of a marketing mentality of what do you need? Ask them that question. What do you need? Let me help you.
Mm. I absolutely hear them. I think that's something that can happen in a university setting. So, I'm the fourth year of my doctoral degree right now, and when we design, experiments in basic science or even more applied science, so much is kind of like coming from our own brains. And yet, when you, like you said, listen and find the collective power and the collective need of the community, that's when things get done, when enough people are on board. Like, we're not going to do anything alone. And so I really love that idea of making sure that we are doing the work where it's needed, and not necessarily just personal projects for fun. And I think that ties into doing things that are fulfilling, and all those kind of things. So anyways, thank you for that. We will move on to another question that kind of ties into that. Um, to listen to the community, you have to have a way to listen to them, I guess. And it seems like in your just illustrative career, you've had a lot of different positions where you've built those relationships of trust. And I'm wondering if you just go into a little bit more detail about how someone of any age, in any position, whether that's in a university setting, in a professional industry setting, or even a layperson whose career isn't in science but has a passion for these kind of things, how do we go about building these relationships? Where are these hubs, or how can these connections be made? And that's a huge question, but I feel like you, if anyone, are well prepared to answer that. So.
Yeah. Um, so I spent most of my career serving the public, which is indeed humbling. It's a joy, but there are moments in a public information meeting when people are asking, "Who is the idiot engineer who designed this project?" Um, you have to swallow your pride, and whether it was me or it wasn't, I would always say, "Well, that was me. What didn't you like about it?" And my voice never got louder. I never fired back, even if people were getting agitated and screaming at me. Um, learned um, that sometimes there's pain, there's bad history, and that they are just venting at you. And in order to get true collaboration working, you have to let some of that venting occur and kind of take it as an out of body experience. But we have a bit of ego. We're pretty good at what we do, all of us. In STEAM, I think, have that strong competence. Most of us were, top of our class going into our university curriculum, and did pretty well there. And there are rigors to what we do, and we pride ourselves in that. But when you're dealing with the public, you've got to set the ego aside and be humble in how you handle questions and interaction, and really listen to understand them, ask some probing questions when they're venting at you. And they can only scream for just so long at a person who stays calm and even toned, and really is asking them questions to try and get to the bottom of what do you need? Let me, because sometimes what they're screaming at me about is not perfectly on target with what their actual need is after we calm down and really turn the problem over together. It's just
Mm.
um, so. Um, there, public information meetings are a good way to do that. Uh, neighborhood meetings. There are neighborhood associations in the city. I I do a lot of work in the southeast neighborhood with the Bowman Creek educational ecosystem, and in order to have projects that go on with a signature project approach, with the idea that it's a 20-year commitment, that we're side by side with you. We're not going to come in, do our $2 million research grant, publish our paper, and go away, and nothing's ever different in quality of life for the neighborhood. We committed to be there and make a difference, and help them expand their positive influence in the world and get needed stuff done. And it starts to snowball when you stay with it and work as an interdisciplinary team. And we do have trust going. So, we're now to the point where after listening well and showing some small success on pilot projects that get at what the neighborhood and the community wanted, you can bring up ideas that align with your research specialty that would be even better. And you know what? They may kind of scrunch up their face at first and they'll say, "Hmm, that's seems like a strange idea, but I guess if it's coming from Gary, who's worked with me for the last 6 years on these other projects, I'm gonna listen. I'm gonna hear him out because he hasn't, steered us wrong so far." So that's what you want to get to as a scientist, as an engineer working in the community where you got that kind of street cred from having worked alongside them, initially on small things, but then you can build and tackle bigger problems.
Mm. Yeah, I love that point you're mentioning. You have building up the street cred. You can't just come in and be like, here's this thing that I want to do, but coming in and listening and doing work with people that's going to benefit them is, yeah, how that relationship comes about. That's awesome.
Yeah, I could tell a story that this second year of Bowman Creek got 22 interns ready to start on Monday. And Friday evening, there's a drive-by shooting. Nobody got hit. There were children in the park where the shooting occurred. The neighborhood was up in arms. Front page article and picture, and I've got students starting Monday to work in that neighborhood. So we had a conversation with the mayor, with the police chief. We had a lot of police presence, but we started with the park where the shooting occurred and met with all the good neighbors around the park and got their punch list of everything they were mad at the city about for 20 years about that park. And we went to work on it and fixed everything that they said about that park needed fixing. And that it wasn't what I initially had in the plan for the first several weeks of that summer, but it was necessary and it made such a difference in them trusting our team that we listened to them and we solved their immediate issues. And then they worked with us on the rest of our scope for the rest of that summer and summers beyond that.
Mm,
If we'd have stayed with our plan, I think we'd have been in trouble.
mm. Yeah, I think it's a very illustrative story of your point there. And it actually ties into another question that we have of in that story you just mentioned, there was this immediate need, right? And I'm wondering how we can address these projects that require us to have this foresight of intervening while there's still useful stock left in the houses versus waiting until it's just demolished. How can we get to the point where we can do that while we still have problems that require our immediate attention? Do we have to just like I think none of us want to just be chasing forest fires, right, and just putting them out all the time. We'd love to build something proactive, but you can't just let a forest fire keep burning. So I'm wondering your thoughts
Right.
on this ability to have forethought when we still have so many
Yeah.
immediate crises that require our attention.
Yeah, you all know about the 2 by matrix with the urgent, not urgent, important, not important.
Mm,
Everybody does the urgent and important stuff. The stuff that's not urgent but important is the most neglected quadrant, in my opinion. And we honestly waste a lot of time on uh, paperwork and bureaucracy that it's neither urgent or important other than bureaucratic systems require it of us. So yeah, you have to be pretty conscientious to force your if you really want to change the world, you want to be a force multiplier for good, you better focus on the long-term important systemic problems, whether it's systemic racism, systemic poverty, um, these kinds of existential risks where generation after generation of children are going to be developmentally impaired from a legacy-led issue, and we're making progress at a snail's pace. I can't bear the federal 300-year answer. We need some entrepreneurial ideas to drastically reduce the risk locally funded ideas that make sense.
Mm, yeah. And on the topic of resources, from your experience, where do these resources come from? You mentioned federal grants. There's opportunities for, I think, clever entrepreneurship. I think you can leverage university resources, but if you could just maybe talk through some clever ways that you've seen resources be found or generated towards these important yet not urgent solutions. We'd love to.
Yeah, I think good ideas, well articulated, find resources, and um, through the years, uh, as someone who was internal to the city and responsible for 120 million out of a $350 million budget, I became adept at reallocation of resources. There's 8 forms of waste when we take a lean approach to looking at our operations. So I would find the waste. When I started in South Bend, there were 13 pieces of antiquated equipment and 13 people doing a poor job of sweeping with machines that had tiny hoppers and only went 4 miles per hour and took forever to get where they were supposed to sweep for the day. We changed that out to 5 units with which were truck mounted and could drive at the speed limit to where they were working that day, and they could work all day with the size hopper they had, and there was no nurse truck. So 5 people and 5 trucks doing more work than 13 to 13. That's a find the ways, reallocate the resources. When we found that, we changed technology of other machines which save money. So on a sustainability issue, the traffic signals in town, did any of you notice when they went to LED? That was funded out of the energy savings entirely. The project self-funded. I didn't have to ask the city council for money. We took what we were paying for the energy bill, we gave it to an escrow agent, we got private lease capital, and with the 90% reduced energy of the LED versus the incandescent bulbs, we paid the much reduced electric bill and we paid off the lease capital in 10 years, and we never asked the taxpayer or ratepayer for more money to
Mm,
do the necessary improvement to make the traffic signals more sustainable. While we're at it, we added push button walkway countdown LED for pedestrian friendliness and bicycle friendliness, and we improved some of the ADA ramps as not an energy benefit, but it was a $1.85 million project that self-funded just by a smarter idea.
mm,
There are those kind of ideas with houses. You can put together a package that would transition to Energy Star appliances, a better building envelope, some low E glass, and suddenly the money that they're spending on utility bills could go to pay a home equity loan to have a much more sustainable and resilient house, right? So we need to use some smart financial tools and reallocate resources from throwing money at too high energy bills, burning more fossil fuels to renewable energy, but also energy efficient appliances and structures.
mm. And I feel like your answers keep segueing into the next questions here. So another question kind of along that line, when homeowners are thinking about making any changes, making sustainable renovations, or when it comes to addressing like future proofing your house, having this foresight, what should be prioritized from a homeowner's perspective if we're um, trying to leverage the knowledge of just homeowner resources?
Yeah. So I I think we could use a tool to make the math simpler for folks, kind of a phone app or a computer app where here's what the Energy Star appliance costs me, here's what it saves me, here's the payback. There are some interesting things to be done with thermostats, smart thermostats that you could set how much you're willing to pay per month and let it decide when to cycle the air conditioning off for periods of time in order to hit your number. So we can use technology tools, and I would start with um, so I I had a lot of scope for the whole city was kind of my house, right? All the public domain. We're the largest landowner in the community. And so I would package things that had a really big payback with some things I knew were important but had a lousy payback, so that my average payback of the package was tolerable. It got through the mayor and the controller as I reallocated resources. So blending your package of what you do, uh, which things are really, I'm not going to save any money, but it's really important to the health of my family, and I give that a priority one.
Mm,
Okay, so some of it, it's not all math. Some of it's judgments of what's important in our life.
mm,
Not everything can be reduced to an economic payback calculation. If it's my child under 7, I'm going to figure out how to do something. And
mm,
I don't mean that to be critical of anyone who's feeling frustrated. That there was one example, a young mother with single mom, 4 kids, had spent all she could afford on the house, and then she has an assessment done for lead, and the lead remediation is $47,000, which puts her beyond the limit of the federal program. It's so expensive, you can't use the federal grant to help, right? And she's stuck. What am I going to do with my children? Do I abandon this house? Lose everything I've invested here? It's tough. So, you'd like to give her some tools to live more safely with lead. And what are the things you can do with a HEPA vacuum cleaner? What if I told you the worst source of lead dust in your house is the carpets, and
mm,
you got decent wood floors underneath there? Would you get them out of there if you cared a lot about your kids? I would.
mm. I think that brings up a good point of not only shooting for the big solutions of remediating these lead problems, but saying we also say like there's a reality in the meantime of people who are living with lead paint issues, and so being able to think about not just like fixing a solution, but also like in the meantime having these sort of ways to live with the problem, because there's always going to continue being these problems, and there's going to be people who like it for whatever reason we're not getting it done yet, or there's not the money yet. And it's real people who are still facing that. And so I think that was just a really good, I think,
There,
perspective on it.
there are there are parallels with environmental health risk in the commercial industrial land category, where many of you have probably heard of something called the voluntary remediation program. And there are adjustable standards that you can do what's cost effective to do to dramatically lower the risk, and you can do some engineered solutions and some institutional controls as part of the mix to keep it affordable, and to do something rather than do nothing because I can't afford to do the absolute, return it to pristine answer. And
Mm,
so we did that with the Studebaker corridor, the Oliver corridor. There we got money from old insurance policies of the Studebaker Corporation before there were pollution exclusions. So half the money for the remediation came from insurance policies. So you look at creative solutions, but shouldn't there be a voluntary remediation program equivalent for lead and housing stock?
mm,
Why shouldn't there be a VRP for residential land use?
mm, yeah. Well, I'm gonna pose another question that we had submitted um, about objective data sources. Someone commented that social media has seemed to make it harder to find trustworthy data sources. Um, and the commenter was wondering what the biggest obstacle is to these objective data sources, and any recommendations or thoughts you might have on how we can, and coming back to trust again, restore trust in these good quality data sources, or create more of them, address problems that we currently have. All that kind of stuff.
How do you do it now in the university? You've got QA, QC programs, and you've got peer reviews of articles and so forth. And I think if you want people to trust it, it can't be one renegade putting up their data without sharing their quality assurance, quality control program, showing
Mm,
their replicates, and having their their experimental setup, everything about their data reviewed by peers. Uh, the citizen scientists, I love that, and I think it's a great thing. But um, as somebody who was responsible for safe drinking water for 120,000 people, I used certified laboratories, not citizen scientists, to test the water. Okay, so it depends on how important your data is, and when human health gets involved, I want QA, QC, uh, credentialed scientists.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a good thing to think about because, if we always had to have this highest level of data quality, that might not like be necessary, right? And we can be able to leverage things like citizen science in instances where it's more fitting, and then in other instances, like you said, with quality of drinking water, that deserves, I think, the highest standards that we can hold our data quality to. So, yeah, not letting perfect be the enemy of the good.
No, no, both have their place. It's just be careful when human health is involved.
Absolutely. So another question, we're getting to the end of questions here, which is good because I know we're getting close to our time. But kind of near the beginning of the talk, we were talking about South Bend has a lot of very old houses, and thinking about these updates take a lot of time, and what is the I guess the relationship between these updates that kind of have to happen, but they happen slowly, or just like starting fresh. Like we can say, oh, in any new buildings we have these I think it's like, oh, what's the certification for new buildings? Like you feel like, oh, they're blank certified. But that's only for new buildings, right? But we still have, especially in South Bend, so many old buildings. And so what's the kind of, I guess, balance between, trying
Yeah.
to update with when we have, I guess, such a large amount of these old houses?
And yeah, I think when Therese Duro was sustainability director at the city, all of our new construction was LEED silver or higher. And we've got a LEED platinum transit bus station and bus maintenance facility in town. So there's some great examples in the community of LEED certified buildings. So part of the problem is affordability. When you look at a large percentage of South Bend being below the poverty line, and they're not going to afford new housing. And when I work with community development corporations on new housing stock with grants from the city through a community development block grant or so on, they're spending about $200,000 on a house in a neighborhood where the market value might be 100,000. So immediately there's this $100,000 loss that the taxpayers in common take in order to do that. And so if really like in the southeast neighborhood, more of the housing is in the $80,000 range. If you could find decent houses in the 40, 50, $60,000 range and put 20 or 30,000 into them, I'm still thinking that that's a better answer because there's a lot of it that will be a payback in reduced utility bills. And then I do think that the city would partner for income eligible people, realizing how important it is to stabilize neighborhoods. We need to infill the vacant lots in the city before we keep doing urban sprawl and greater vehicle miles traveled and building roads into what was fertile farmland and forested areas that were denuding into more and more subdivisions. And I would rather see us densify the city and fill in that infill. But how do we make it attractive? How do we get some momentum going on rehab so that a developer would feel like they could invest in the city in a neighborhood that's on the upswing?
Mm.
There's momentum.
It makes me think of, it seems like a lot of the problem is that there's not that upfront capital that's needed, even if it will be savings long term, right? And it just reminded me of the idea of like microloans and microgrants that I think is popular internationally in terms of, at least my familiarity with it is like, let's say you're working with farmers and getting an upfront money to get a new stock for a certain animal, and then it's paid back slowly over time. And these smaller amounts like maybe a middle class American's mind, but being able to jumpstart and provide that momentum, but that it is paid back. So it's not just having to be this funding. So there's this kind of, I guess, economic feasibility. I wonder if something like that could be applicable here, where the city is able to kind of help grease the wheels of that upfront cost, but is able to also recoup, so that it's not just having to shell out money with getting nothing in return. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that kind of idea?
Yeah, uh, I would do test models of several creative financing approaches. One of them that's intriguing to me is we used to build neighborhoods in decades past with something called Barrett Law bonds. And we would issue bonds, taxpayers in common, but they were for a specific street, a specific neighborhood, and they would get a coupon book and they had to pay their Barrett Law payment over time. And it ran with the land. And sometimes people would only live there for 6, 7 years, and there's a job change, there's a transfer. The Barrett Law obligation ran with the land. There's a legislator from the Bloomington area who is trying to get the equivalent of Barrett Law for neighborhood bootstrapping altogether.
Mm.
But it gets at that issue that we tend to be a mobile society and the average homeowner stays in the home 7 or 8 years. And the payback on some of these things may be in the 10 to 20 years range. So what's the bridging mechanism that the next owner gets the benefit of much of the service life of all those improvements that were done, and they get a financing mechanism where they pay the Barrett coupon book along with their principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. But part of it is this obligation in common to come in and do a whole neighborhood at once, where you get economies of scale and bring the price down.
Mm. Wow. Well, I think that was actually our last question, and I know we're coming up on time, so I'll pass it back to you if there's any concluding thoughts you have. This has been a fascinating discussion with the presentation as well as the Q&A here. So I just want to preemptively thank you one more time for giving your time tonight to speak with all of us.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. I just want to, I haven't cornered the market on solutions, but I thought if we put the compelling issue in front of a bunch of smart people, that the collective wisdom will bring about some actionable ideas. That's what I'm hoping for from tonight. Do contact me if you're one of those folks who's itching to do an actionable idea, particularly if you have some resource, some grant, and you're looking for leveraging, and you're looking for engagement in the community to accomplish it. I can't guarantee it, but I do a lot of that kind of matchmaking.
Awesome. Well, with your permission, I'll maybe share these slides and your contact info in the group, so that those who tune in tonight and those who will be tuning in afterwards will have a way to get in contact with you and to keep this momentum hopefully going as well. So
Okay.
awesome. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next month for our event. Okay. Stop the live stream.